We'd like to take our seats. You'll take your seats, we'll convene the meeting, and I'll ask Councillor Butler to open with Karakia.
Kia tau te paramatanga. One's off. What?
It's on.
No.
Turn the sound off.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Kia tau mai te maramatanga. Kia tau mai te rangimari. Kia tau mai te kaha mai te araha mo tēnei kaupapa. Huye kai kie.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. And I'd like to invite Board Member Henry Dixon to the table, seeing as he's made the trip over the hill this morning, got here on time, and a board member from Motueka may join us later, but she's not here at this point. So apologies this morning. I've got apologies from Councillor McKenzie, Deputy Mayor Bryant, Councillor Greening, and Mayor King for lateness. He should be here shortly. Would someone like to move those apologies be received? Move Councillor Hill, seconded Councillor Shallcrass. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. We've got nobody speaking in public forum today, so everybody knows where the toilets are. So that's pretty simple. Any declarations of interest? No? And just remember, we've got the news media in the room today, and it's Local Democracy and Stuff. And I did note that it was Local Democracy and Waimea Weekly, I am sorry, and it was Stuff who got it wrong yesterday in their figures in the press from yesterday's meeting. So we've got no late items. And the first thing is confirmation of minutes from the policy and strategy meeting held on the 20th of April. Would someone like to move their true and correct record?
I'll move that.
Councillor Butler, seconded Councillor Ellis. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Right. So we have got some time constraints because we've got a couple of workshops, and I know that there is a community grant subcommittee this afternoon starting at 1:30. Is that right, Councillor Wall? Right. So we'll just bear that in mind. So my chair's report, I'm happy to take that as read. Are there any questions? None. Would someone like to move that be accepted? Councillor?
I'm happy to, yes.
Move Councillor Hill, seconded Councillor Maru. Got it right. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Right, we're trucking along. So Waimea Groundwater Quality Report and Survey. We've got Melanie and Joseph coming today, and I know they've got a presentation, some slides. So you should all have read the report and the technical report. So Joseph, Melanie, would you like to come up? And you've got a presentation to give us, as I understand. On you, yourself. So over to you, Joseph.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, councillors. This report covers principally the Waimea Plains that most of you are familiar with. And monitoring water quality is one of the core roles of the regional side of our council. We are unitary. In the Waimea Plains, groundwater is a significant or principal source of water for a range of use, from urban supply, for drinking, for industry, for irrigation, and also private property use where they don't have a reticulated supply. And also the use of the water is a key economic driver for the Waimea Plains. If you see what it relates to, from the MDF plant to vegetables to apples to all the things you see in the plains. Now, elevated nitrogen levels in groundwater can have various deleterious effects both on ecosystem and human health. Now, this report provides the most and the latest data on the Waimea Plains, and incorporates regular monitoring as well as what we call synoptic monitoring, which is a snapshot in time. We do a lot of wells. We can't do 100 wells every 3 months, but we do them over a span of time so we can see how the distribution of nitrates in the Waimea Plains and the aquifers has evolved or changed over that time. So I'll pass over to Melanie to actually present the technical part of the report.
Okay. And we've got some problems with technology, as I understand. Some of the people on Zoom can't hear, but we'll keep going because we do have some constraints. But are you going to get some assistance from our technical people? Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Are we able to change the slide, please? Cool. So this is just a bit of a disclaimer. I'm going to only be talking today about the nitrate specific results. Obviously, this technical report covered a lot more things in here, including a wider range of chemistry that we also analysed, but for the interest of time, we'll just be looking at nitrates. And I'm really hoping this is going to work. Sure.
Yeah, and just pull your mics a bit closer. You've got a nice quiet voice.
Is that easier to hear? Cool. Fantastic. Next slide, please. Yeah, cool. Technology. Okay, so for those who are unaware or new to the region, this is the Waimea Plains. We're currently sitting at the council chambers at the very edge of it, here in Richmond. There we go, little tiny park one here. Cool. And so the area that we're talking about is here. So this is the geographical land area of the Waimea Plains. It goes well into past Belgrove in the south, and then goes up and starts off in the Wairoa Gorge as well. One thing to point out is that groundwater discharges well off the coast, so well into the Waimea Inlet and Tasman Bay. So this is just showing where the land area of the Waimea Plains is. Ooh, too bad. There we go. So where are the Waimea Plains aquifers? We've got 4 principal aquifers here. We've got the yellow one. Where's my little... Anyway, I'll talk to it. We've got the yellow one, which is our Hope Minor confined and unconfined aquifer. This is mainly recharged from the Eastern Hills through the Fang Grapples as it comes in, and is sort of bordered to that western edge by a river terrace riser called locally as Burke's Bank. And you can see that riser up there. It's not shown there, but up there on that sort of 3D digital model, you can see that riser coming up there. We then also have the green aquifer, which is the Appleby Gravel Unconfined Aquifer, and this is caused from the local rivers that carve through it, and they have alluvial gravels deposited there. So the Wairoa and the Waiiti coming through, meeting and making the Waimea River. We have 2 confined aquifers in this area as well, which sit underneath our unconfined aquifer area, and these are old paleo river channels. So old deposited river channels have carved through and created deposited gravels as they came through. So the upper one is the upper confined aquifer, and this starts at the Wairoa Gorge and makes its way northwards, and it merges and discharges up into the Appleby Gravel Unconfined Aquifer around Bartlett Road, State Highway 60, that sort of area. And then we have the lower confined aquifer, which sits underneath them all. And this one starts at the Wairoa Gorge and then makes its way out up towards Rabbit Island and discharges well past Rabbit Island. Okay. So we first identified elevated nitrates back in the 1970s when we were doing a catchment investigation on water management. And age testing of that nitrate indicated that we could have had contamination dating back to the 1940s. So this is a problem that's been happening for quite a long time. The elevated nitrates were located across most of the plains, specifically in the upper confined and the lower confined aquifers. Since the 1970s, council's undertaken various actions, including having catchment investigations similar to the one that we've just done, and we've undertaken 6 of these throughout the years. There was also a piggery located in the recharge area, which is indicated by that black circle, and this is a recharge area for the Hope unconfined, the upper confined and the lower confined aquifers, so 3 of our main aquifers in play. And it's thought to have been a major source of the nitrates in this historic. So looking at the previous synoptic surveys, in the 1980s, in the 1986 survey, you can see that red line coming up through the upper confined aquifer, and that's showing the old piggery plume as it's coming through, the elevated nitrates. The yellow, orange and red concentrations on this image are above the drinking water standard and the green is below. So the 1986, you can notice in all 4 aquifers, there is evidence of elevated nitrates in there. And as we progress through to 2005, we're noticing that the nitrates are decreasing and are slowly making their way out towards the coast. Then we got to 2016, which is the one on the most right-hand side of your corner, and we're noticing a trend that was different to what we had observed in the previous surveys. We're noticing in the upper confined aquifer that there was an area to the sort of western side of the plain of that aquifer, which had elevated nitrates in it, which were not associated with that historic piggery plume. We also were noticing that there was a concentration of nitrates that were in the red, so above 20 grams per metre cubed, that were accumulating in the Bartlett Road, Ranzau Road, Blackbriar Road area, which was higher than what we had seen in the past. Which brings us to present. So in 2021, I was quite busy and I sampled 149 sites alongside Joseph and a couple of my colleagues. This covered 137 groundwater bores and 12 river and spring sites. So it was quite a comprehensive study of nitrates across the plains, and you can see the density in those images. So looking at what we found from the nitrates, we had 41% were below 50% of the maximum acceptable value. And they were located Brightwater to the south. So everything south of Brightwater was well below the maximum acceptable level, which is the health standard to drink. And along the western side of the river was also had parts of it which were below 50% of the maximum acceptable value. However, we were noticing on the eastern side of the Waimea River that the majority were above 50% of the maximum acceptable value, and 28% of those were above the drinking water standard. So to compare that to what we found in 2016, we noticed that the highest area of nitrates was in the same areas that we found in 2016, so that Bartlett Road, Ranzau Road and Blackbriar Road area. However, the spatial area from 2016 to now has grown. So the area that has higher nitrates has grown in size. In 2016, in the Bartlett Road, Ranzau Road area, the values were around 24 grams per metre cubed, and now they're up to 31. And along Blackbriar Road, where it was 28 grams per metre cubed, it's now at 30, so it is going up. We estimate that the historic piggery plume in the area of that hotspot is between 11 to 16. So there's obviously a difference between the 30 to 11 and 16. So there's about 10 grams per metre cubed that we've got running around coming from another source. So water taken from these areas using the water that's around 11 to 16 grams per metre cubed obviously is in high nitrates. If they're using that for irrigation, you're using high nitrates to then irrigate onto the land, which will then infiltrate through and be recycled. So we're noticing there's a recycling effect of the nitrates happening in this area. We also are noticing for the first time in 2021 that on the western side of the river, on the western side of the Waimea River, there is an area of nitrates that are above 50% of the maximum acceptable value. And this is the first time we're seeing quite a wide area appearing. The areas that have elevated levels of nitrates, so above the maximum acceptable value or approaching the maximum acceptable value, are all in areas that have quite intensive horticultural and agricultural activities happening. One thing to point out that in 2016, we were able to resample, excuse me, we were able to resample 112 of the sites that were sampled in 2016. We also sampled an additional 25 sites, and that's to further trying to fill in gaps of spatial extent that the 2016 survey couldn't identify. So alongside the synoptic investigations, we also undertake regular groundwater monitoring in this area. This includes our State of the Environment program, which we sample 6 bores in the Waimea Plains every 3 months. And they're located up there on the screen, which might be a bit hard to read, but I'll see if I can point them out. We've got 3 coming in from the unconfined area. No, this doesn't seem to want to reach that. We've got 3 coming in from the unconfined area. We've got 1 located in Spring Grove and 1 that's located in Appleby. And both of those are showing decreasing trends over time with nitrate. We have 1 located around that Lansdowne Road area. And that is showing that there is an increasing trend. In the upper confined area, we have 1 located just outside of Brightwater. And this spore is semi-confined, and we are noticing in recent years that it is going up in nitrates. And then we have 1 located in that sort of heart of the hotspot area, still confined in that area. And we are noticing a nice decreasing trend throughout the years. And this has actually been tracking the historic piggery plume. So you can see that coming down from around mid-20s to 30 down to present day, it's around 9. So it is tracking down nicely. We also have a bore in the unconfined area, so that's located along Lower Queen Street, just beside the MDF factory, and that is showing a decreasing trend in nitrates. So landowner concerns from the 2016 survey prompted us to undertake monthly monitoring in that hotspot area, and we have 3 bores that we undertake monthly sampling from. They're located spatially quite close together, but they're all doing different things. So we've got the one that's sort of it's really annoying that this isn't picking up, but the one that's along Bartlett Road closest to the river, sort of your southwestern one, is 127, and this one is quite reactive to rainfall. So we noticed that when there's really high intensity and concentration of rainfall event, we're noticing that the nitrates do spike up and respond with that rain. We've then got one that's in a apple orchard located along Bartlett Road and Ramsdale Road West. And this one is semi-confined, and it's relatively stable with nitrates coming through, averaging around 16 grams per metre cubed. But we do notice those spikes in nitrates coming through, and we have had on record at this site 52 grams per metre cubed. So it does spike in range. Then we have the one that's located along Blackbriar Road. And this one shows some quite nice seasonal trends. So as it starts to rain more over winter and spring, we notice the nitrates come up, and then they come down over the summer and autumn periods when we're not getting much rain. Unlike this year where it has rained a lot. So just to summarise and wrap things up together, we have nitrate occurrence in the Waimea Plains, and this is a combination of historic and present day inputs. South of Brightwater, groundwater is great with nitrates. It's decreasing and well below half of the maximum acceptable value. North of Brightwater, elevated nitrates are found in parts of these aquifers. The areas that have increasing nitrate trends have overlying agricultural and horticultural activities. The highest nitrates in 2021 were found where the upper confined aquifer merges with the Appleby gravel aquifer, and these are in the ranges of 31 grams per metre cubed, and then also along Blackbriar Road where it was around 30 grams per metre cubed. Irrigating of elevated nitrates in this area is causing a recycling effect of nitrates to be occurring. The nitrates originating from that historic piggery plume located in the southern part of the upper confined aquifer is decreasing, which is great. Nitrates in the lower confined aquifer is stable with a slight decrease noticed in recent years. And to touch upon some stuff that was in the technical report that I haven't talked about is that we have had E. coli detections in parts of these plains. This contamination is localized and it's usually from the wellhead security being not secure and allowing some contamination to enter through. And I understand Lisa will be here to talk to you next regarding an action plan to how council is going to be addressing these nitrates in the Waimea Plains. So she will follow our presentation. Have we got any questions?
Yeah. Mike Kittermont, but just before, it doesn't surprise me that it fluctuates due to weather. Having farmed on the plains myself, it's light soil and stony and free draining. So if you get rain and there's nitrates in that soil, it will move through. So that's to be expected. So I've got Councillor Kittermont first. And just remember, we do have an action plan in relation to this coming from Lisa, who's speaking to us next.
Sorry for the blank look there, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask the questions anyway, and you can tell me that they're coming through the action plan anyway? Okay. Melanie, you mentioned the E. coli detections.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fecal coliforms. So are they from drinking water bores or are they just from monitoring bores? That's question one.
Sure. So through the chair, the E. coli detections are from we tested E. coli in all of the bores that we sampled. This included irrigation bores and sort of sentinel monitoring bores, and also from people's drinking water bores. The detections were located in a range of different ones. Some of them were from drinking water bores and some of them were from irrigation. It wasn't discriminatory as to which ones were getting E. coli detections. Yeah, we were noticing them in any ones which had, most of them all had pretty poor wellhead security, which I was discussing with the landowners while I was on site.
Good.
Yeah.
The secret word then was landowner. So you're talking to the landowner when we got, okay.
Yeah.
The technical report, are we going to get that as part of the action plan, or can I?
You've already got it.
You've already got it.
It's in your pack there, Councillor.
I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
If I can address the talking with the landowners part of it though. So every E. coli detection that we had and every nitrate detection that was above the drinking water standard, I personally got in contact with those landowners once we got the results back from the laboratory. So they received either an email or a phone call about them. That landowners in that hotspot area where there is that elevated nitrate, alongside the letter that we sent with the results, we also sent one to every property in that area, regardless of whether we took a sample from their bore or not, alerting them that they did have high nitrates. This was sent in early 2022. Back in 2016 in that hotspot area, they also received a letter covering what to do about their elevated nitrates. So they've received 2 letters from council now informing them that they're in an area of elevated nitrates and what to do about it.
Okay. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you. In terms of, it's been a long time, the plume's heading down the plains toward the coast. Have we got any idea of what impact it's going to have when it hits the coast? Does anyone looking into that or know, or is it going to be negligible? Is that something that we're concerned about? Is it, I just can't imagine, other than seeing a red blob on the, I can't imagine what, as it arrives, if it's just minimal enough just to get sort of diluted, or whether there could be impacts on the life on the coast.
I'm going to pass over to Joseph for this one.
Through the chair, the groundwater gets out in several ways. One's some of the coastal springs, and the others is diffuse all over the plains. And there's an incredible amount of dilution with the amount of salt water that's coming into the estuary. So if there's any detrimental effects, it will be seen in any of the estuary reports, And Trevor would have reported on it, but the issue in the estuary seems to be sediment.
Yeah. So if it was to have some impact or be noticeable in some way, just our regular testing and what we're monitoring in our estuaries would show up.
The estuary monitoring should
Yeah.
show any impacts of it, but you got to look at the volumetric scale of what's coming into the
Yeah.
inlet versus what's going out through the aquifer.
Yeah. And in terms of the testing that you've been doing and our site, I think we'll be all right time. But because it's the reason we're here, actually, isn't it? But the amount of sites that you've tested, if you had more resource in your department, would you have tested more? If you could have just picked what actually you think would have been the most appropriate amount of testing and where, and you had unlimited resources, unheard of. But if you did, what extra might have been done, or perhaps nothing?
It's right. Okay. Quite a lot to unpack here. We're bound by where people have put their bores. So there are some areas, particularly where we've got the Waimea East irrigation scheme, where people haven't got bores, or they took their bores out because they connected to the scheme. So we do have gaps of knowledge in that area that's been covered by that. In terms of if I could sample every bore, I feel like we still would get that same picture. If we were going to go absolutely crazy and drill a whole heap of bores in, I feel like we would still end up with the same picture. I feel like the coverage we've got has been adequate to come up with the conclusion that we have. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Ellis.
Hi, thank you for your report. I've just got a couple of questions or a clarification as well. In the report, it said they were also seeing agricultural chemicals coming through those aquifers as well, which we haven't touched on in your presentation. Are the pesticides in those areas increasing with rainfall like the nitrates are in those bores? And two, is it a reasonable assumption that given those areas we were seeing increases of nitrates and possibly chemicals in the water after rainfall, if there's going to be increased irrigation in the plains with the Waimea Dam, is it a reasonable assumption that we would see those nitrate levels cycling with that irrigation level? So whether it would peak up and down with the irrigation, or would we see it at a higher level on a standard plain?
So through the chair, there's two questions to unpack there. I'll address the pesticides one first. So the pesticide survey that we've been a part of is through the ESR National Groundwater Monitoring Program. And this is a sample that we take every 4 years. So we've reported the 2018 one here. We just recently undertook sampling in 2022. However, we haven't got the results back yet from ESR from that. Because we're only sampling once every 4 years, we're not able to detect if rainfall has an effect on whether pesticides are coming through. However, the detections that we're noticing are really low. So we're finding them in like parts per billion in terms of their concentration. This is well below the drinking water standard. None of them have exceeded the drinking water standard, and they're all quite low below it. So we are noticing detections, but they're not to a health problematic one. And all of the detections that we're noticing are of pesticides that are commonly used in those sort of agricultural horticultural practices. So we can't tell if they're fluctuating with rainfall because it's only one sample being taken every 4 years. So we can't sort of link that to what the rainfall's doing. To address about if there is increased irrigation, whether we would notice an increase in nitrates. I'll answer this and then I'll let Joseph chip in as well. The irrigation on the plains, to use water is expensive, so they're only applying what they need to make sure that the crop is growing adequately. So I don't feel like if there was an increase in irrigation, that it would noticeably have an increase in nitrates, because they're only applying what the crop needs to use to grow. Do you want to chip in, Joseph?
Through the chair, just to add a few things, Councillor. One is that the previous pesticide survey, just to cover it off, ESR also included glyphosate, fondly known as Roundup. We found none. So they've dropped using testing for glyphosate because it's expensive. And Melanie's reinforced a few pesticide we found were in parts per billion. And the challenge is that the detection limits of these fantastic instruments, when we first started doing them in the 90s to now, has got incredibly better. So we have very few detections and they're very low in Tasman. And Melanie's explained they are related to localized land use. In terms of the dam and irrigation, we went through a whole heap of hearings and commissioners, and one of the reports that was produced is by Landcare, and their modelling showed that if we have increased flushing from the dam, that's the whole idea of the dam, they in Cawthron were definite that the river water quality will improve significantly from what we got now, and they anticipate with that extra flushing and recharge over time, the aquifer water quality should improve. So I used the word anticipate. So those were some of the bases of how the commissioners made the decision to grant the permit for the dam and its operation. So those reports are available, and some of the councillors will be privy to those reports that were presented at those hearings.
You've got a follow-up question?
Yes, I'm just curious as to when you said that over time, the levels of nitrates would drop because of the flushing. Is there any indication of what that timing might be like?
The mean residence time, this is what the scientists use for groundwater in the Waimea Plains, is just slightly above 0, which is very young, to 150 years old. So you're talking about decades of the parts of the aquifers we are talking about. Down Lower Queen Street, the mean residence time of the water is over 70 years. And in that hotspot area, we're probably talking about 40 years. So that's the midpoint of the age. So you're talking decades from the time that you start improving or decreasing nitrogen inputs to see the effect. And one of the things Melanie and I were both in a presentation yesterday by some work that has been done in another colleague council up north, where even if you stopped everything, it'll take quite a long time before you start seeing the effect, because of the residual content of these things in the soil. So you won't, if you stop everything from your septic tanks to whatever you're doing anyway, it'll take still years before you start a declining effect. So you're talking decades, not sort of, you're not even talking 5 to 10 years. You're talking the sort of 30 to 50 year kind of lag.
If I can add on to that as well, in our upper confined monitoring bore that's located in that hotspot area, in the 1980s, it was around mid-20s to 30, and we're only noticing today that it's down to 9. So it's taken that length of time to drop from 30 to 9. So it does take a long time for those nitrates to make their way out.
Thank you. We'll make this the last question, and then I've just got a comment. Councillor Shawcross.
Yeah, thanks for the report. Obviously, lots of good learning again for us newbies. Just the nitrate, exactly what is that? And I can sort of figure out roughly what it is. And also the depth of these bores, obviously that must make a difference depending on what depth you are for the different results for the sound of that. So yeah, just exactly what the nitrates, where it comes from and what it's all about.
So nitrate is found in basically everything. It's one of the main building blocks for life. It's quite a tricky one to sort of detect and look for because it's colourless and it's odourless and it doesn't have a taste. So the only way to really find it is to do a test at a laboratory. So to take a water sample and send it to a laboratory. You can't look at your water in this jug, for example, and say, yeah, it's high in nitrates because it's got this color or it smells like that. It's something that's it's like a little silent thing. It's there, but you can't see it. You really have to test for it to know if it's got problems. And in terms of the depths of the bores, it depends on what aquifer you're testing from as to how deep the bore is. So in our shallow confined aquifers, so the Hope confined aquifer, sort of on that main heart of the plain, this aquifer's it's got little lenses coming down of gravels from those fans, and that can go down to about 15 metres in depth. In the upper confined aquifer, it's around 18 to 32 metres in depth, depending on where you are. The lower confined aquifer is a lot deeper than that. And in the Appleby gravel aquifer, it's sort of from ground level essentially down to about the 16 metres in depth range. So the nitrates that we're noticing in the upper confined aquifer are along that sort of eastern edge, and then as they come into the middle, it's hard really to tell what aquifer you're sampling from in that sort of Bartlett Road, Ransdale Road area, as it's the upper confined aquifer is its confining layer fizzles out essentially and fans up and into that Appleby gravel aquifer. And so they're ranging from the depths of about 18 up to ground surface level. So I hope that's answering your question there. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking, thank you very much for the report. We've got time constraints. The biggest thing is there are a lot of parts of the country that are much worse than this, as I understand it, and they have some exemptions where we're actually looking to fix this. Would that be correct, Joseph?
Mr. Chair, can I add a few more things? Our infrastructure managers asked me to add a few more things, just a minute or two, just to inform the councillor. Nitrates, as Melanie said, it's everywhere, from organic matter that breaks down to wastewater from the septic tanks to garden compost to fertilizer. And nitrogen is the mobile component. It's very water soluble. So, you know, when organic matter break down and nitrify and rains, it can leach. Same with fertilizer, we put on one range to the other. So that's the source of nitrate, and nitrate's in everything. Your spinach has got lots of nitrate, so it's a lot of food we eat. But the secondary thing is that the TDC's water supplies, all our water supplies for Brightwater, Richmond, Mapua, and through Redwood Valley, all come from the aquifers of the Waimea Plains, and we comply with less than the 50% MAV. Two things, our aquifers are in the good part, the largest supplies are in the really good part of the gravel aquifer. The one aquifer, the lower confined aquifer in Lower Queen Street, that aquifer is somewhere between 34 to 42 meters deep. That has historic elevated nitrate, but it's coming down to just about the limit. But to meet the trigger value, we mix that water with the much higher quality water from the gravel aquifer in the green area. So all our supplies meet the drinking water standards.
Thank you, Joseph. So I'm looking for someone to move that we receive the report. Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Mara. Thank you for your time in the report, and I know that we will see you again, and I look forward to that. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Joseph. Melanie, very good report. And those that haven't gone through the technical report in detail, it is worth going through. Right, Lisa, you're up because you've got the plan going forward. So Lisa's on Zoom, so let's hope it's working.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Cool.
I hope you're getting better.
Trying to. Yeah, I've got another lurgy after COVID, so unfortunately couldn't be there today in person. Are you happy to take my report as read, or would you like a quick summary?
I think a quick summary, because it is a plan going forward, but everybody will have read it.
Yep. So as Melanie said, my paper follows on from the synoptic work that you've just seen. The focus for today is seeking direction on two aspects. Firstly, how we approach action planning under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. And secondly, to seek approval for starting a action plan process for the Waimea Plains based on that synoptic monitoring that you've just looked at. So action plans are a requirement under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater 2020. They were identified in the 2014 version, but the 2020 changes have significantly added to the detail and the requirements around action plans, and have really clearly tied them to implementation of the National Policy Statement and to the water management framework that Council needs to implement. There's two ways that an action plan is triggered under the National Policy Statement. The first one is where we find degraded water bodies or degrading trends in water quality, and those are currently identified through our State of the Environment monitoring programs and work like you've just seen with Melanie and Joseph. The second way that they are triggered is as we work through the National Objective Framework under the NPS, which is a key process that we have to go through in terms of developing the new plan, is finding where water bodies have attributes where the current state doesn't meet our desired state. So those aren't necessarily degraded water bodies. It might be where the community chooses to improve water quality in a water body. So anywhere that a current state doesn't meet the desired state, that would trigger an action plan as well. And I guess in terms of what we've been doing already, we have been already doing work in a lot of the catchments to address the issues that have been identified over the years, and in particular there's been work going on in the Waimea Plains with the Waimea Nitrate Project, and there's also been work going on in the Tākaka catchment for Waikato-Pupu Springs in terms of the action plan that was approved last year for progression in that catchment. So I guess in terms of the Waimea resolution that I'm seeking today, it's really just formalising what we're already have been doing in the Waimea Plains with Hort NZ and the local growers, but it's also meeting our legal requirements under the National Policy Statement. And I think too it'll bring, by formalising this, it will bring a bit more structure and focus to those pieces of work, particularly in terms of the review and reporting requirements that go along with the action planning process. Yeah, I guess that's the main gist. Is pass it over to questions.
Okay, Lisa, I'll just see if there's any questions, and I would compliment you. I've been to some of those meetings with the growers on the plains, and it's a pity we did lose our facilitator that you had, but they were very positive meetings, and certainly the growers were receptive to working with council, which I thought was useful. So I've got, somebody's happy to move the report, but I've got a question from Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your report, Lisa, and yeah, trusting that you bounce back with your health. So through you, Chair, resolution, there's a bullet point 4, and it states may need funding through the current and future long-term plans. Can we have some reassurance that this is actually already a figure sitting in those plans? Thank you.
So Lisa, do you know roughly, or have you done an estimate with your manager, who I see is sitting at the back of the room, and he's coming forward? So if you don't have the answer, Barry might.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? Oh, Lisa, just sorry, we're talking about this coming long-term plan, are we? Yeah. So that's a process. Sorry, Barry, but I mean, it's a process we're going through at the moment, right? So I'll let you. Sorry, I jumped in there. Sorry, mate. You go for it.
No, we will be bringing that as part of that back to you as part of the long-term plan, budgeting work that we do. It's split across policy and environmental information. So council's recently obtained funding for 4 catchment officers, part of funding through, I think it's MFE, isn't it? Well, yeah. So part of their role is to aid in these action planning process as well. So part of it's BAU, part of it may be new, depending on the scale of the plans once we get into them. So sorry, I can't give you a hard answer.
Yeah, part of the challenge we'll have through the chair is obviously until the first initial drafts of the action plans are developed and we get a feel for the scope of the actions that are identified through that process, it will be hard to identify exactly which of those actions would be ones that are implemented by council and what the cost of those actions are likely to be. So there is a bit of a step before we can firm up the figures that are required. But yeah, I guess in terms of this decision, I guess it was identifying that would go through a separate resolution process in the future.
Mr. Ridd?
I'm just checking, councillor, that covers off your concerns. I mean, it's definitely in our work plan to make sure it's discussed in the long-term plan process. Does that?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I just would hate to think we go through all this process and then we hit a wall because actually we didn't prepare and plan in advance to take our water quality seriously enough to implement the plan.
Well, in terms of water quality, we will have directions from the Environment Court, and there's a national policy statement. So it's clear direction from government. It's work we will have to do.
But if it would be fair to say, it doesn't mean that we get funded for what we're mandated to do. And I'd hate to think that the stumbling block here was because we didn't put it in the long-term plan. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. But we've actually got some funding from MFE already. So that's some progress. So any other questions in relation to Lisa? If not, I've got Councillor Butler is happy to move it. Have I got a second to Councillor Dowell?
I'll just have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks, Lisa. I'm happy to move your report. I did notice in the report that you talk about the Tasman Environment Plan, the freshwater, the National Policy Statement, freshwater management, but also you mentioned regulatory, a regulatory component. So sorry, this might be a bit complicated, but I'm just wondering what the actual connection is going to be into the regulatory process. Is that something that council is going to have to do? Is it going to come from central government? Because I know there's a bit of nervousness around, from farmers about regulatory processes. And, they're a bit worried about engaging. I know they're going to have to engage with freshwater plans, their farm plans, but at what point does this become regulatory? Or if that's too tricky a question, then just say so.
No, that's fine. Through the chair. I guess in terms of reference to regulatory, the action plans, they work alongside our current process, which is, so we've got the land and freshwater parts of the Tasman Environment Plan still being progressed to seek a notified plan. And that will look at, a large chunk of these issues because the main focus of that plan change is to implement the National Policy Statement. But in terms of the action plans, they can identify a range of methods, and that can include both non-regulatory, so it might include specific monitoring investigations, education and advocacy work, services by council, or partnerships with, community stakeholders, growers and iwi and the like. So there's a bunch of stuff that could be included in these action plans. But they could also identify further regulation required in the plan. So that would be plan changes. Now, it depends on the timing of the action plan development. So we've obviously got the Waikato one currently, and I'm seeking approval today for a Waimea one. So we'll have two that are the main focus. Those may identify changes to the plan that we haven't already identified through the review process in time for the current review, but they may identify ones that happen in the future. And I guess, and also just to touch back on Councillor Walker's question, this action planning process is the start of a process. So these action plans, they sort of remain live documents. They need to be reviewed. I think it's every 3 years. And so as the issue sort of changes over time and monitoring, hopefully we will see improvement in them. But we may also identify that, we might try a bunch of actions, they work a bit, we might need more in the future. So these action plans could have quite long timeframes. And so when you're thinking about, you know, Joseph mentioned before, some of the Waimea Plains issues, you know, could be with us for 40 to 80 years. So feasibly, these action plans could keep going, depending on, you know, how successful we are with our initial action plans. So it is about identifying the whole breadth of different options that we've got open to us to address these issues. And they can focus on not only reducing the issue, but actually mitigating the effect as well. So an example of that would be obviously in the Waimeas, we would be looking at contemporary sources of nitrate generation in terms of trying to reduce the issue, but also we might look at how we might mitigate some of the effects. So if we, for example, in the drinking water space, there could be options for targeted reticulation or rainwater tanks to make sure that people have a potable water source that they don't need to worry about in terms of the drinking water standards for nitrate. So it's a potential for a multi-pronged approach. And we won't really understand what that looks like until we've done that first draft. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really good. So yeah, I'm happy to move.
Right, well, I've got a mover and a seconder. No one else has got another question at this time. This is the start of a process, and I know that Lisa and her team have already started some of this work. A quick question, Councillor Hill.
Yeah, I don't want to be quick so much. You know, this is a standing committee which trumps a workshop, I would say. We can truncate our workshop, I think, if there's important things happening here. Just a comment that, you know, the FMU thing is very good, I think, and, you know, the integrated approach, you know, we've, you know, called for that for a long time, and I think it's just very good that we're there and that it'll allow for other, you know, I don't know, the ability to manage things generally, I think, you know, is improved with that type of sort of paradigm. So want to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. That wasn't a question, but that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, good. Okay, so no other questions. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Right, so I thought it was Wouter was coming for the next report. We won't break for morning tea. We'll go and then we can have a break at the end of our meeting. We'll keep going. So is he, or is it Dwayne? Are you replaced? We'll be right. Well, we'll just wait for. Just wait a minute. So is he coming on Zoom? Or is he coming down?
Through the chair, he's coming in person. I've just messaged him.
That's right.
I'm happy to, it's a very straightforward report, so I'm happy to introduce it and wait for Will to answer all more detailed questions.
Sorry,
Apologies for share. I'm happy to introduce the report. Walter should be out on his way, so he can answer any more detailed questions if it helps to keep things ticking along.
And Dwayne and Wouter, I understand this is your last meeting and somebody's made you an offer you couldn't refuse. So I'd just like to, on behalf of the council, thank you for your service and the number of discussions that I've had one-on-one with you with some difficult topics in terms of stormwater and other waters, and wish you all the best in your future. And we might see you back here working for someone else occasionally, but we'll see. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And welcome, Mayor King. That's right. So
We're going to say, Walter, like Rouser.
yeah, I know I'm hopeless. I know. Yeah. Well, yeah. Right. So now I've had another language skills lecture this morning, so that's not
The
bad.
only way I can do it is remember router. Router like router.
Anyways, Dwayne, if you want to start and we'll carry on.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been in New Zealand 10 years, and I think that's the biggest struggle here, getting my name pronounced the right way. But we'll get there. Thank you. Yeah, I'll introduce the activity management policy to you. We had a workshop in February when we spoke to you about this as well. So we've taken your feedback on board. I largely take the report as read. I just want to point out the situation with the Three Waters. I guess that the reason why we waited a bit longer from the February workshop to now was that we were hoping there'd be a bit more certainty around dates for transfer of Three Waters and how we would manage that through our activity management plans. Fortunately, there is not a whole lot more certainty, so we still had to make some assumptions. For that, the key assumption there is that we we have developed a 10-year stormwater, wastewater and water program for the National Transition Unit already anyway. So we will take that as our basis and basically take the 2 years of those, or 1 year, or however how many years we end up with into the LTP, but we consider it as a 10-year program. And that's what we're currently working on. In terms of activity management plans for the Three Waters, we are planning to do a light touch review of our current 2021 AMPs and make the changes as needed that are relevant for those years that we remain the responsible entity for those assets. So not a complete AMP for Three Water activities similar to all the other activities, basically. So that's kind of the key message I wanted to get across. Other than that, yeah, I'll take the report as read and we can take questions.
Right, thank you for that. So questions on the report going forward?
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
No other questions, because it is relatively transactional, but there is some uncertainty with Three Waters. That's and we will lose some control going forward. Some. So I've got no questions. So I've got a mover. Have I got a seconder? Councillor Ellis. All right, so we'll put it. So this is quicker than I thought. So people are happy. So no questions. So we've got moved Councillor Mara, seconded Councillor Ellis. We'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. That was, how simple was that for your last report? Right, so the next item on my agenda is Strategic Policy and Environmental Policy Report, and that includes Dwayne and Barry. We can take the report as read, but are there any particular points you want to highlight? I did see a few red flags in the report, but not too many.
I'm happy to take my part of the report as read, Mr. Chair, and I've got Walter and Alan in support as team leaders in case you've got any further questions I can't answer.
I can just give a bit of an update around RM reform. We've been in discussions with the Ministry of the Environment around some additional resourcing to help us scope up alongside Nelson City Council and local iwi what it might look like to move to the new resource management system. And we've had a very clear indication from MEC that they're prepared to help resource us for that exercise. So it's just sitting down with our iwi partners and our Nelson City partners and having a look at what it would take to actually kick the wheels and start the process to move to the new system, which will be a spatial plan and a new plan. That's a generational change in how we do things and how we plan and how we manage our environment. So having the resource thing to actually take a really hard look at that, and so we can have a really good understanding of what it means for councils and iwi, is going to be a really good opportunity. So we hope to undertake that work over the coming months.
Mr. Ridd, and then I've got a comment and then I've got some questions.
Barry, just a quick question. In terms of governance involvement in that process, can you maybe just outline that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we've got an initial governance structure, which is a steering group, which involves Janine, our CE, and 3 GMs from iwi, so 1 GM from each waka essentially, as part of the governance group that will oversee this exercise.
In terms of resources, my question would be that might be finance, but is it actual people to do the work? Because that is a real issue.
Yeah, that's a conversation where we met with officials on Friday. It's probably people. I would think it's people. So if we can get officials who've got a really good knowledge of the legislation and how it's supposed to work, then that would be better than them giving us money, I think, at this stage.
I would wholeheartedly agree with you. It's people on the ground to do the work rather than just the money. Councillor Maru?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's in regards to the community leasing and licensing policy, and noting that there's a pending workshop potentially for that. Can I just preempt and just ask that prior to the workshop, that some thought is put in terms of the definition of a community organisation and what that might relate to compared to a commercial one. So it's just preempting the workshop content in terms I'm really keen that there's a clear definition of a community organisation.
So you're happy with that, Dwayne?
Yeah.
Okay, made a note. Any other questions at this time going forward? That's very quiet. Or asked. So we'll do. There's there'll be a one-on-one with the mayor at some stage. Right, we'll just leave that. Yeah. Particularly the RMA reform does look complicated when you do some reading, and I don't see it being easier. Having just done some workshops with new councillors that are doing their making good decisions, I think going forward it's going to be even more complicated, and we're going to have a whole lot of new case law over a period of a long time. If there's no other further questions, I'm just looking for the motion on my machine. And it's just to receive the report. Have I got a mover? Councillor Kitamot, seconded Councillor Ellis. No other questions? I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Best of luck with your work with the ministry, Barry, because it's really important. Barbara and Dwayne, it's a team, obviously a team effort, so you can take the report as read, but comments and bits you want to highlight before we go forward.
Thank you, Kia koutou. Yeah, exactly. You can take it as read. It's a little bit long this time. There's quite a lot happening around climate change, but I'm happy to answer any question that you may have.
Any questions?
It's more a comment than anything. I just, being a rural person now, I get the rural newspaper, and this one that came out this week, they've just done a review on the electric vehicles, the SUV type situation. And one of the major concerns they have with these vehicles, it being off-road, is the heat of the catalytic converters on the hybrid ones. setting fire to the grass in the paddocks due to low ground clearances. So please be aware of that when you start changing the council fleet. I'd hate us to be running around the country setting fire to everything.
Your comment is well taken. In fact, the fire that is taking place, that has took place for 30 hours in Auckland, the lithium batteries of cars were one of the big issues. So we will keep that in mind. Very well made comment. Thanks.
Barbara, you're pretty well connected at central government level these days. Could you perhaps give an indication of what you're hearing coming out of Wellington a little bit particular? I mean, some legislation, there's all sorts of stuff going on. We've got a bit of time, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, in the climate change space, Aotearoa New Zealand has really woken up, and government has signaled very clearly that by the end of the year, the Climate Change Adaptation Act there will be a draft, and a lot of discussion at the moment is around managed retreat. On top of that, industry is preparing quite importantly to understanding consequences of litigation around climate change. And so that for that, we're preparing some sort of guidance for yourself, for the board as well. There are clear signals that our government needs to move faster from international type of situations that are happening. Spain is in a state of drought. Italy has been flooded in the middle of again after just several months. And so that our government has been actually drafting within the trade agreements, has been drafting quite significant clauses around climate change. The trade climate agreement that we signed just a month ago, for example, included for the first time a chapter on climate change, women's rights and indigenous rights, actually. And that will mean actually that our government is going to really put the pedal forward. Has been trying to delay several kinds of guidance. And it looks like that not only government, but government in collaboration with local government organizations, Te Orua, etc., they're actually gearing up themselves to bring climate change resilience at the forefront of all the work that we're doing. There are discussions about insurance type of, so the reinsurers of the world have been talking to New Zealand about who needs to pay what. And so we're working very closely with central government to ensure that just type of sharing of cost will happen. Yeah.
Okay, no, you're not first, Councillor Maru. You're third on the list. So I've got Hill, Butler and Maru.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. In terms of just a little question around infrastructure sort of rollout for charging EVs. You know, I haven't actually looked at you've got a link here to the draft strategy, but I haven't read it. It's a government strategy, but and there's some funding, I think, out of the budget around infrastructure rollout throughout the country. I suppose, you know, how do we get our share of that in our region and areas that we head to? We might want it here, but we want it on the way as well, don't we? But, you know, I was just hearing the other day about Tesla and how they're providing EV charging infrastructure, and someone who's just doing a bit of checkout on our solar system at home has just bought a Tesla, cashed in his KiwiSaver when he got to 65 and was talking about that. And he said that when they pull up to the Tesla sites, there are lots of plugins, and it's super quick, and the other sites are the people are queuing and waiting and needing to spend an hour on them. And I just wonder if he's pretty enthusiastic, lovely guy, but I just wonder if, in terms of those more I guess private or company based infrastructure setups, is that the case? Like, are we is what councils are rolling out and government are rolling out, is it sort of secondary in some way in terms of standard and capability?
You can, I've got some answers after.
I'll defer to Barbara to talk about some of the government initiatives and the funding that's potentially available. But probably the thing I'd observe is that electric charging stations are the BPs of the future. Private enterprise is picking up the opportunities that car parking charging presents. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but BP next door here, for example, has installed some fast chargers there as well. Supermarkets are installing fast chargers. Across the country, and especially in urban areas, private enterprise is doing everything it needs to do. Where the government has, I think, put some of its focuses on the larger commuter trips between larger centres, where in our district, for example, just out of Murchison, between Murchison and let's say Rangiora, there is limited charging infrastructure. So it's been trying to target those areas where basically you can give the consumer confidence that on those large trips they'll be able to go stop and have a place for charging, and that's where the government, at least in the past, has stepped in. So, for example, Springs Junction, I think. There's been a bit of work around providing charging infrastructure in that location because it's roughly halfway between here and Christchurch. And most EVs won't get from here to Christchurch unless you have a lot of cash and you can buy one of the more expensive long range ones without some sort of stock drop. So that's where the government has put some of its emphasis. I'll refer to Barbara in terms of some of the opportunities that maybe government has for funding.
Yeah, so that Nelson City Council received about a year ago or something funding to carry out a study on how to then transition the council fleet to EVs, which had consideration as well, a small consideration about installing as well charging stations. Okay, which could have been used by the community, so that we are actually exploring if ICA has got some funding available for us to understand how we can enter in this space with the charging part of this. At the moment, it's in the hands of it's in the, like Dwayne suggested, it's the private companies. One of them is Mevo, for example, that actually have approached both ourselves and Nelson City Council to go 50-50 with the installation of EV chargers around the region. And Nelson City Council proceeded with this suggestion. We have decided to defer it because the cost of installation, so Mevo will just install everything above ground. We need to install beneath ground. So we need to actually do a cost type of benefit type of estimate in order to be able to take to bring over to you and make an informed decision. And there are considerations that needs to be taken, that it's one supplier, which does not create competition. So that's an issue, clearly. And they don't have the mass. So that at the moment, Nelson City Council has just made an agreement to have a fleet of 7 cars doing that. The idea was to have cars that were going from Nelson City Council to Tasman City Council as a first step. But still, the cost will be quite high because, yes, apart from the building the infrastructure, which probably is about $2,500 per station at the end, which is not really incredible. But the cost is really in the service, because that's how Mevo makes the money, that we'll just lease the cars for $20, $25 an hour, which is not exactly commercially very competitive. And so that's what we are considering. And we are in discussion with ICA on how we could tap, or they could support us with funding in order to set up charging stations around the country. In the moment is the Teslas and the renewable is the automotive industry or the Mevos that have got this kind of share of the money. It's within their investment.
I think herein lies the conversation. I think the direction you're going to have to give us is this. I'm not saying this is like housing, but it's similar to, how much do you allow the commercial? I mean, Dwayne alluded to the commercial sector sort of ramping up here. How much do you actually get involved in this as local government? Actually get involved like Nelson have, or whether or not it's about, and the challenge is, when I think this probably is like most councils have been approached by the commercial sector that's going, we want to put charging stations in, but we want to take 5 car parks out, and then you're getting the whole, arguments around taking car parks out. So I think really I think we'd impress probably through the long-term plan some, one of a better phrase, policy setting around actually where you sit in this game, whether or not you're actually actively involved or whether or not we're there facilitating, pushing, doing our lobbying as opposed to actually provision. And I think that's some direction we probably need.
That's what, and what's what ratepayers might expect that council, what they're thinking, our role might be in all of this or not.
Yeah, through the chair, there are some obvious, not necessarily us supporting the electrification of the vehicle fleet, but our car parks, particularly our larger central car parks, and whether we haven't yet got to that point, but starting to think about whether we actually need to put charging stations in some of those car parks yet. Simply because we're like the supermarkets, we're a convenient place where people park up for a few hours and it's very straightforward for them to plug in. It's not necessarily that it's transformational, but it might just be something that's expected in the future. It's just some thinking that the team are going through.
Right, thanks for that. Councillor Butler is next on the list.
Thanks. I'll just comment, as the owner of an EV, I think that I've noticed that, the number are there's still a lot of leafs around and there always will be, but there's also people buying these EVs with really big batteries. And so the charging and for small trips is maybe not such an issue. I don't think we shouldn't assume that all electric cars are going to have small batteries. So there will come a point where we don't want to oversupply. And I agree with all the discussion about commercial. But my actual question was about, I heard on the radio that the release of the 3 categories of houses that have been damaged and whether people are going to be allowed to rebuild or not rebuild, and they're going to have to leave where they live. And so there's a lot of stress and distress about that. But what I think my question is what is council's role financially going to be with managed retreat? And if we do have a situation where we've got a lot of damaged homes and people are saying, well, will the council help me? And also I understand that the Adaptation Act is going to deal with that to a point. Have you got any more that you can tell us about that? Because thinking of planning ahead.
Yes, it's a very good question because in about 2 or 3 hours, Ox Bay residents, they're going to know their fate, whether they're allowed to rebuild whatever was damaged and who's going to pay for what. So at this stage, there is no clarity. The only clarity that there is that there will be legal obligation following to certain parties, whether it's government, council. There will be a co-responsibility. What is sure is that insurance have pulled out. The reinsurers of the world that decided that they will actually revisit every single insurance that we have in our house. And so they will be saying, if there is a risk of, we will not reinsure you. And so that their discussion, two papers have been prepared for government on managed retreat to inform what kind of framework do we need in order to be able to mitigate and understand that clarity. But that information specifically will be coming into the Climate Change Act. But by the way that we're seeing things, they will not have much clarity. Most of the legislation that we had around climate change had different degrees of clarity, especially for us as councils, so that what we're doing as a group of councils, we're actually be preemptive and we're informing and we're trying to lobby government to have clarity around this, especially where responsibility and costing lies. Because at the end, that's what.
John's got a comment.
I think, obviously our planning comes into this, I mean, where do you allow development in the future? That's going to be uppermost. We do hazard mapping, etc., which we're constantly at. And we all know where that's heading. So, I think for our council's role in this is probably our planning function. Obviously, the insurers will pick up in terms of liability, that sits firmly with the Earthquake Commission, I presume, and also with the insurance. Managed retreat is a conversation you're going to have, and you have to make some decisions, I think.
Yeah, I feel nervous about it, and I feel nervous that councils are actually going to be landed with a bill one way or the other somehow.
Yeah, just to add on that very quickly, actually, you will receive that into your weekly update actually in a few days time, in 2 days time. But EQC is about to release its natural hazard portal. And for the first time, EQC will have case law. So cases that are in front of courts around climate change and hazards in general and climate change as well. So we need to work on this. We need to be because everything we need to be transparent. So we need to understand how we're going to inform our communities. Better to be preemptive than reactive, because that's what Hawke's Bay is finding itself now.
All right, I've got Councillor Mara next, but this isn't a new issue. I can remember about 2013, we designated an area as a hazard zone. And Councillor Dalla acknowledged he remembers it, and it went on people's limbs and we got some flack, but it's flooded since. So, it's not something new for us because we've had weather events for many years. So that was an area that people choose to live by the sea, and they built a wall in front, but it still gets flooded. They don't get wave action, but the water comes through. Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure if it's Barbara or Dwayne, but just in terms of 5.3, where we've got a snapshot of what the government's budget for 2023 is, do we have current resource in council that actively seeks to see where there may be some funding for council or for businesses within the Tasman district, and how does that work? Do we advocate? Yeah, have we got that resource to leverage any of those opportunities for our district, whether it's through private partnership or council directly?
Can you repeat?
Yeah, through the chair.
Sorry, can you? I missed the beginning.
So in the report at 5.3, there's a list of the government budget funding that's available. So do we have currently the resource in council to advocate to look at those funding opportunities, either be it for council or in partnership with private business?
Through the chair, what we do have is a new resource in the form of Barbara, who is much more on top of climate change related matters than we have been in the past and opportunities. I think it would be fair to say, though, that we can't chase down every opportunity. We have to be fairly selective about those ones that we think we've got good prospects of. A real lesson for me was the IAF application 2 years ago, where we committed substantial staff resourcing. And we did get some money for most worker out of it, but in relation to the effort we put in, probably wasn't the best choice of resources or the best use of resources. So yeah, we do have more than we used to. We're certainly in the transportation space. We're well resourced. We've got 2 transportation planners. But I couldn't hand on heart say that we chase down every single opportunity or every opportunity on behalf of our community when we're not necessarily involved.
Thanks, Ryan. And I only asked that question is because further up at 4.6 or 4.7, I read that Nelson City have got the equivalent of 4.5 FTEs, which I suspect we've got the equivalent of 1. So that's sort of my question. Is that a reason in terms of resourcing to really dedicate time and effort to push Tasman's climate action plan?
I think Dwayne's nailed it on the head. What we've all local government in the recent past has grabbed has taken, I guess, investment from central government and, as a whole and gone, yeah, let's bring it on. But actually what that's done is put a lot of pressure on the organisation. So I think what we've got with Barbara is someone who's much more strategic in our thinking around climate. I'm not speaking for her, but very strategic, hugely experienced in this space. So knows what buttons to press and where to chase the dollar that's going to have the best return for this organisation. That would be my suggestion. I don't know if I'm stroking an ego there, but it's certainly we've got a highly experienced person here who's knows this part of the business really well, and so we'll target where we go for the money. But I don't think I think just to reinforce what Dwayne was saying, there's a risk in trying to take everything.
Okay, thanks for that. So Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair. Yeah, Barbara, it's awesome that we have you, and I appreciate the mahi that you're doing and the level in which you're engaged with central government. Go you. One of the statements that you made right up, and I know that Councillor Butler has touched on it, was around the managed retreat. So I guess for me, I sit here with that, as a councillor, our role is to try and mitigate as much risk as possible. But also our role is to be able to provide accommodation and a place for our communities to live in. And I know that regularly when we sit in Motueka, we hear about, can't build on the east side, we've got a retreat, I'm keen to have some dialogue with you and others, because I know this doesn't just sit under the portfolio that you have or your role, is around when will we develop an appetite that we can start looking at some of our other land, which could be deemed as high productive for somebody's lens that they look through, but for some of our orchards, it's no longer high productive, but low productive land. So I'm really keen to engage on how do we actually future-proof to keep Motueka on the map, and what are we going to do with this whole retreat word that comes to the table? But thank you for that.
I think in response to that is probably it's more of our Jeremy Barry district planning stuff. Obviously, the advice is coming because Barbara works across the organisation, but absolutely that's a conversation where the whole district plan aspect of your work. And that's going to be challenging, isn't it? It's going to be really challenging.
Right, that was good. So it is part of the planning process going forward, that's for sure. And that's what Barry was talking about, because to redo that TEP, it's 10 years of work, and we're about 4 years down the track, and then the rules have changed. So there's more work to do. Of course, Chris. Councillor Hill.
I just think that the amount of areas covered in the report is very good. Like it's a big area, and I just appreciate the way it's presented and the sort of snapshots into various aspects with links to deeper reading. It's very good. I've really appreciated the report. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you very much, because one of the questions that Anna and I wanted to put to you was, we know that this was a bit massive, and we know that we understand that you receive a lot of information. So going forward, we have an open door, just provide any kind of feedback of how would you like to have this even more summarized, more strategic, so that you can take your decisions. So it's an open door, we can improve always, but since climate change, all the work that we'll be doing going forward will have really the stamp of climate change and climate action. We're really keen to hear from you. How would you like this information to be presented in order to be taken those decisions that needs to be taken in going forward?
Well, we definitely need the information. So to go forward. So no other questions. Councillor Kittelmore.
I reply, Barbara, on behalf of myself. As a newbie, I found it very difficult reading 155 pages. But having said that, the links in here to get further information is absolutely stunning. So what you're doing suits me. I don't know about the rest of the councillors.
Councillor Walker, are you happy to move the report, seeing as you sit on the climate forum representing us? And have I got a seconder? Councillor Butler?
I'll second that, seeing I'm also on the climate forum.
So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. I'll now come to councillor Hill to close the karakia, and then we'll have a cup of tea. And we've got a workshop or a couple of workshops.
Thank you, Chair. Karakia tātou, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu, te moana, aroha atu, aroha mai, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, everybody, for your, as the Deputy Mayor says, enthusiastic input.